folks, and welcome back to Wonder of Watches. Now today we're looking at the Orient Triton. But firstly, thanks so much to Bruno for allowing me to use his amazing drone footage of Johnstown Castle in the intro. We met out there on Sunday. We chatted about drones and gimbals, computers and YouTube, and I have to say he is an absolute gentleman. Please check out his channel, The Laptop Tribe. His footage is absolutely incredible, particularly if you love old estates, houses and castles of Ireland. Now, thanks also to Tim, who's a fantastic supporter of the channel. Sorry, now I just need to get my glove on straight. It's hard to operate a touchscreen and wear gloves at the same time. So Tim, he's a great supporter of the channel, always has been. He's also a member, as I am, of the Dublin Watch Group. Again, very supportive of the channel, and he's lent me this one for review. In fact, we swapped pieces. I sent him my Orient Star Classic the other way, so obviously both massive fans of the Orient brand. Now, this watch has really taken me by surprise. Some of the finishing is absolutely exceptional. Some is not so good, but we'll get into that later. Now, whether you are at the beginning of your watch journey or somewhat further down the road, invariably you're going to happen upon the Orient/Orient Star brand. For me, it was very early on. I had already banked two Seiko divers, an SKX, this guy, heavily modded now of course, and a turtle, not this guy. It was actually an SRP 777, which is the black dial variant, but the Paddy Turtle as an SKX Pepsi, the 009 alternative. It does all the things that the SKX doesn't, with applied indices, beautiful sunburst dial. The finishing is just exceptional, and then a movement that hacks and hand winds, which of course the SKX doesn't. And hence you're left in this old-fashioned, the 7S26. Anyway, back to the Triton. So it's more likely anyway that you'll find the brand being mentioned as a real contender and an alternative to Seiko when it comes to affordable divers. Many a time I've heard the Orient Ray and Mako mentioned in the same breath as the Seiko SKX for the title of Best Affordable Diver. In fact, now that Seiko appear to be increasing their prices across the board and the SKX has continued, that title is now indisputably Orient's. And I personally think that the Orient Komatsu in both the green and red dial variants not only beats the pants off Seiko in terms of value and specs, but also looks like an absolutely stunning piece of kit. Now, the Orient Star that I bought, so as I was saying there, I had the two divers, the SKX and the Turtle, but I wanted a dress watch. So I ended up pulling the trigger on the Orient Star Classic, which I still absolutely love. But the truth is, folks, Orient and Seiko are stablemates under the one parent holding company, but they still operate independently of each other. And just above that entry level point, the Makos, the Rays, the Komatsus, we have this dude. This is the Orient Triton, named after the love child of Greek gods Poseidon and Amphitrite. This is an absolute beast. Now, I've always been interested in this watch, so let's get into it. The case then, we've got a diameter. I've had trouble with my calipers. Actually, it's very dusty. Dusty old calipers. Yeah, it doesn't calibrate too well anymore. I suppose that's what you get for spending very little on Amazon. Anyway, let's see if it works. Okay, so we have a diameter of 43mm. Sorry, now my light's just not picking up the... It's got a lug width of 22mm. It's got a height quite thick, 14.3mm. I'm getting there. I got 14.1 earlier, somewhere between 14.1 and 14.3. We've got a lug to lug of 51mm. So it's a bit of a beast of a case. Now, it's water resistant to 200 meters. It's got a screw down crown here at 4 o'clock. It's got brushing on top, and it's got beautifully finished, polished sides. The case, you could say, is actually a bit like the SKX on steroids, and side by side there, they don't look massively different in terms of size, but I would say the Orient Triton is a slightly bigger watch, particularly in the lug-to-lug area. And actually, if you look at the lug-to-lug on the SKX, so the SKX has a lug-to-lug of around 46mm, and at 5mm it does make a difference to how wearable the SKX is. Okay, now we've got a really well executed case back. It's polished on the outer diameter, radial brushing at the center encompassing the wonderfully executed Orient logo. The dial is the absolute star of the show here. The dial appears to have a matte finish, but at the same time, in certain lighting conditions, and you can see it under my just my desk lamp here, there is a very subtle sunburst effect, but there's great depth to the blue used here, and it's complemented very well by the muted tones of the blue bezel. The finishing on the applied indices is exceptional. They are flawless to my eye, and the application of lume is clean and plentiful, and it shines, well, like a Seiko. Again, we can draw comparisons here between the indices and those used by Seiko on their Turtle this time. The design cues are not too dissimilar there, but the dial also has a power reserve indicator, which is one of the most useful indicators out there. So you can see there that red hand on the power indicator just at the 1 o'clock position. It's showing 20 hours of power reserve at the moment. As I wind the watch, you can see that move up through 30, and when it gets to 40, it's fully charged as such. I'll just get that now to screw back in. There's the threads aligned, and screw back in, ensuring its water resistance. Now, one of the things I absolutely love about the dial is how the indices at 12, 1 and 4 o'clock are manipulated or truncated to accommodate the power reserve and date complications. I think that's a really stunning feature. Now, the hour and minute hands are spear shaped and have a very nice brushed finishing. Now, the bezel is a little bit mushy sounding. Don't know if you can hear it there. But it has very little playback when it's in position, and that is great to see. Now, if I move it up to the 12 o'clock position, it is slightly misaligned to the right hand side, and if I move it on a click, it's slightly misaligned on the left hand side as well. So alignment, not great, but again, they are stablemates with Seiko, so I guess that can be expected. But the blue used on the bezel is really lovely. I have to say, it's got muted tones. As I said before, it complements the dial really well. Now, the movement used here is the Orient caliber 40N5A. It has hacking, winding, that power reserve indicator. It's got a date function, and it ticks away at 21,600 beats per hour. The 40N5A offers 40 hours of power reserve. Now, the crown is really well finished. You can see that black circle in the center, just adding a little bit of finesse to the crown. The crown itself is signed, and it's got a beautiful application of the logo with the logo itself is raised and polished, and it's got a kind of a frosted effect then on the outside. It's lovely. Now, I did say that some of the finishing is not wonderful on this, and that really comes down to the crown. Winding and everything is great. Changing the dates and moving the hands is super. But if I pull it out into the time change position there, I don't know if you can see, it just has that bit of a wobble there. I don't know what's causing that. I did speak to Tim, and it didn't take a knock or anything like that. So it's like that out of the box, and that's just a little bit disappointing. Also, it can be a little bit cumbersome finding the threads, but I got it there fairly quickly. But other than that, beautiful finishing. Just that wobble is a bit off-putting. Now, the bracelet is fine. It uses push pins. It's got a push pin system, so quite old fashioned, and again, very similar to Seiko. I haven't tried changing the pins or anything like that, but now it's the clasp has double push deployment. We've got a stamped clasp rather than milled, you know, but it's perfectly acceptable, perfectly functionable and serviceable. And of course that clasp, again, just to show the finishing on this watch, it's beautifully signed there. It's an oyster style bracelet that distinguishes itself with a slightly raised center link, and we have solid end links here, and they're female end links, which I absolutely love. It just means that they can fit the wrist fantastic. And speaking of which, let's do a quick wrist shot. I'm wearing a vintage Omega from 1954. Now let's get the Orient on wrist. So there it is. Yeah, despite its 51mm lug to lug, it does actually sit quite well on the wrist. It is curved, the case is slightly curved down towards the wrist, and that certainly helps. But you can see it's a beautiful watch. Just look at how legible the time is. Actually, one of the things I noticed about this watch was the interplay between the rehaut and the dial. The rehaut, like if you look at the SPB053, the rehaut on this, it's sloped in towards the dial, so it ends up taking up some of that space behind the crystal. Whereas the rehaut on this, it's more like a steep cliff. It doesn't slope in, and then it takes very little of that space. The indices are pushed right out towards the outer circumference of the watch. So you end up with quite a bit of real estate in the center, but that's great because it has to accommodate a power reserve indicator and the Orient logo. Now, I wasn't a massive fan of the Orient logo, but I actually think it looks really good here because it's got that red in the center that complements the red of the power reserve indicator, and it's super. I actually saw somebody recently and they swapped out the black center part of the crown with a red one just to complement those red accents again. It really is a stunning looking watch. So the cost of the Triton then, it's still available for around €390. So as I say, just above that entry level tier, and it's certainly worth that. It's with 200 meters of water resistance, that power reserve indicator, an in-house movement from Orient, and a fantastic heritage. Orient have a fantastic heritage, and they've been around since the 50s. Japan made movements and watches, stablemates with Seiko. You can't go wrong here. Now, unfortunately, it is a little bit big for my wrists, so personally I would need to look at alternatives. And the immediate alternatives that spring to mind are from their sister company Seiko. Now also, I am a massive fan of Seiko. And talking about blue dial variants, so as an alternative then in a similar price bracket, certainly on the used market, this is the SPB053. Now we've got different design aesthetics here, particularly around the indices, the bezel as well. It's got a finishing to it, a lacquered finishing to it that just makes it more glossy than the Triton. The Triton looks fabulous there. But you could pick this one up probably a bit more. This one's about $390. The SPB053 you could get for about $450 on the used market. The sunburst effect on the dial is slightly more amplified than it is on the Orient Triton. Now the other one then, which we looked at slightly earlier in terms of blue dials, is the Seiko Paddy. Now again, you can pick this one up for around €300 still. I bought this one from Simpkins Jewelers, based in the UK, and I got it for around €300 at the time. They're a bit more expensive now, but again, I think the sunburst effect on the dial is more amplified, but the design aesthetic is more similar than the SPB053. The indices are quite similar across the board, and that would be a real alternative. Again, lug to lug on this one, if we take a look, it's a slightly more manageable. The turtle is a big case. The turtle the turtle is diameter 44 mil, but the lug to lug is 47, nearly 48 mil. But again, that 3 mil makes a difference to how it sits on the wrist. Let's just put both on wrist and we'll see how they compare. So there's the Paddy on wrist, and that looks good. And there's the Triton on wrist, which is just a touch larger, and I think the paddy probably suits my wrist a bit more. Now, I've knocked over the case there. Let's just take a look at the paddy turtle and the Triton side by side. Actually, side by side like that, the turtle actually looks like a bigger watch, but the Triton is definitely a bit heavier on wrist, and the lug to lug on the paddy, the shorter lug to lug, just makes it a little bit more wearable. So that's it. That's the Orient Triton. It really is a fantastic watch. Bar that little wobble in the crown, that would be my only complaint, but it looks beautiful there. Great watch. Thanks again. Thanks a million to Tim for sending it down for a review. I've really loved spending time with this one. And thanks to everybody for watching. Good luck, everybody. Ben.